while we're telling these stories to ourselves and oftentimes other people, they bind us to the past. A story isn't about what's happening right now, it's a narrative about the past. And the more we keep repeating these stories to ourselves or to other people for attention, validation, pity, whatever it is, the more it binds us to the past. It keeps us backwards in time. It prevents us from moving forward.
Andrew, talk to me about how the story that we tell ourselves keeps us stuck and from ultimately breaking through.
The stories that we tell ourselves are the narratives that we wrap around what actually happened, right? So something happens, whether it was yesterday or 30 years ago, and we can either just report the details of what's happening, of just, this is just what happened, and this is perhaps how I feel. We could do that, or we can wrap a story around it. We can say, well, this person did that to me, and that means this. Well, because they did this to me, I'm this person. Oh, I can't ever get here because of my family history. Oh, well, the government is doing this, and that makes me a blah, blah, blah. These are stories. These are narratives that we tell around what happened. And while we're telling these stories to ourselves and oftentimes other people, they bind us to the past. So a story isn't about what's happening right now, it's a narrative about the past. And the more we keep repeating these stories to ourselves or to other people for attention, validation, pity, whatever it is, commisery, the more it binds us to the past. It keeps us backwards in time. It prevents us from moving forward and arriving to actually what is right now. And what is right now, I can almost promise you, is not the story you're telling yourself that came from 30 years ago.
What keeps us, I guess, wrapped up in a false narrative? Like where does the untruth in the narrative or stories that we tell ourselves, like what's that rooted in?
Oftentimes, it's rooted in either some sort of trauma, it's rooted in, let's say, a victim mentality, it's rooted in unresolved emotions. And so it's really hard to get over something when you have trauma or when you have anger, resentment, fear, hurt, bitterness, sadness, grief, when those are still there, when they're still wrapped up in our subconscious, then it's really hard to let those stories go, because what the stories do, as we keep telling them, is to reinforce why you feel that way. And for so many of us that perhaps are either fully in a victim mentality or just maybe sometimes seduced by it, is that by telling these narratives, by telling these stories, our current culture and a lot of cultures support it, right? Oh, poor me. Oh, this happened to you. Oh, you're oppressed. You should feel like crap because of this. Oh, nothing is your fault. Always blame other people. Don't take responsibility because there's nothing you can do about it anyway. Cultures, families, friendships, our societies, there tends to be supportive narratives around us that feed into these stories. So not only do you have your own traumas, perhaps, and your own unresolved stuff, you also have oftentimes cultures, families, societies, and even times governments that are not only enabling, but pushing and supporting you to stay in these stories.
How old are you, Daniel?
I am 36.
Okay. So you're old enough then to remember in your adult life a time pre-social media, I don't want to say pre-internet because the internet, 25 plus years, but really you remember a time in your adult life when the internet, the access to it and social media wasn't accessible to the level of degree that it is today. Would you say that the current environment of social media technology is contributing to creating that seduction of the victim mindset? Like I can, in any point, I can go online right now. I got 60,000 people spread across multiple platforms, right? If something bad happens to me, I can easily play the victim and have people start patting me on the back. Not everybody has that level of reach, but if you got a couple hundred people that are engaged with you and are following you on any type of social media, it's very easy to go out there, share something, and then you get the dopamine by the people just patting you on the back and saying it's going to be okay. Do you think that that's a big part of what's driving it? Is this social media environment that we're living in?
I think that's a huge portion. Never before in the history could in instantaneously within seconds go and have our stories validated, to go and find evidence, cognitive bias, um, that is a confirmation bias to us, and so that is available, and also generally the culture itself. A lot of people um, aren't taking responsibility. A lot of people are feeling sorry for themselves, and I say this, I bring it up not to bash on current culture or anything, but if you go back, let's say 100 years prior to, let's say 100 years ago, if you didn't work, if you didn't produce, if you weren't doing something constructive with a good portion of your time, you would die. If you weren't hunting, if you weren't planting, if you weren't showing up to work, if you weren't doing what the Pharaoh said, whatever it is, whatever point in history, you didn't have the luxury of sitting around for hours, for days, for weeks, for months, for years, feeling sorry for yourself. You would die, or bad things would happen to you. So we are so comfortable at this time in history with our technology. It's a blessing, and with a blessing, there's also some of these these dangers.
I guess what's the antidote? What's the counterbalance here, right? I talk a lot about, I call it the microwave society. To push a button, you can kind of have anything, within a matter of minutes. Food, hungry, push a button, choose, it fills up, shows up. Like I need to go somewhere, boom, shows up. In my space, right? Pornography. Like if I'm feeling stressed, if I feel like I need some type of sexual release, easy to pull up some videos, some pixels, and just boom, easy. I got everything that I need. I don't think we're going back though, right? We're not going back to farming times. We're not going back to living under pharaohs. So with all that in mind, like what's the pathway out of this?
That's a great question. Oh gosh, what's the pathway out of that? I can't sit here to say that I know for sure, but I know some things for sure, and that's that narcissism doesn't work, that the victim mentality doesn't work, that feeling sorry for ourselves doesn't work, that enabling societies and cultures to not stand for anything doesn't work. There are a lot of things, Frank, that just do not work. And in the modality that I practice with my clients, cinesomatics, one of the really amazing things about it is that it's not just an academic, theoretical belief or even scientifically evidence necessitated approach. It is results oriented. When I watch a client moving in their body to show me, let's say making money, to show me having intimacy with their partner, to show me approaching a woman, what we can see in their body shows what actually works. And so I've been very fortunate to see uh, thousands of people not just intellectually discuss, well, what about this or what about that? Maybe this works in society, maybe it doesn't. I have seen people in their bodies show these archetypical ways of being that work and don't. When I see somebody moving in their body that's depressed, that feels sorry for themselves, that's narcissistic, that's running from ego, that has an addiction, that's looking for the easy way out, that wants to just push a button and have everything handed to them. When I see somebody show up like that in my practice, you can see there's suffering. You can see that that doesn't work. That person is not being fulfilled. That person isn't connecting with people around them. So it's very clear to me that there are things that do work and there are things that do not work, regardless of what spiritual or religious belief system, political belief system, economic system you have. There are things that work and things that don't. And a lot of what we're talking about doesn't work. And the only reason it's perpetuating itself is because you have a society that is promoting it, and you have technology that allows it.
Yeah, well, let's dive in here and talk about some of the things that do work, right? And I think maybe a good place to start is, maybe a high level overview of the work that you do with Cinesomatics. So what it is it? What is it? How did you discover it? And we'll kind of kick it off from there.
Yeah, so cinesomatics is it's a transformational approach, I guess you could call it, maybe a modality philosophy. And let's just start with the name, cinesomatics. So cine is of cinema, video, and somatics is of the body. So already you can see that this is very different than normal, let's say, therapies or coaching approaches, which are usually based in talking about things and coming up with strategies and tactics. What we do in cinesomatics is we have people move. So they move in their physical bodies. It's not a fitness thing, but it's a physical thing in their bodies. And then using cinema equipment, we film them moving. And then after we film these movements, we have a certain set of movements that usually reveal certain things. We sit down and we play this video back. We play their movement back on the screen. And what I am doing as a facilitator is I'm not in my head analyzing them, but I'm in my body as well, and I'm feeling their movements. So I'm feeling how they're moving in their body. And I give feedback on all of that subconscious. It's like sub body language. It's not body language. It's the stories we talked about earlier. Those come through subconsciously through the body movement, as well as different mythologies, archetypes, shadow material. So people's blocks, people's plateaus. If you're stuck in life and you've read all of the books like I have, you've done the modalities, you've done everything from Tony Robbins to maybe plant medicine and everything in between. You've done all this stuff and you're still stuck. There's things still running you. Well, what I do is that I help people see what those are. So in a matter of minutes, I can see how much money somebody makes. I can see what their sex life is. I can see how they see the world. I can see how they see themselves. I can often see their parents' relationship. All of this is in our body. We hold on to this in our body. And our psychology and our emotional state gets not lodged, but it gets imprinted in the body. So, for example, this is very superficial, but it gives you an example. If someone's been depressed for many years, their body language chronically becomes like this, even momentarily. And so that's a very obvious thing to see. So our body adapts our psychology and our emotional state. And so what I do is I show people that. So they don't have to just believe me. They get to see it for themselves in their own body, that the way that they show up physically is how they show up in their life. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And so how somebody moves in their body, how someone shows up to the space is how they show up to their life. And using this reflective process, we help people discover that stuff and break through it.
Yeah, man, I'm so fascinated with this, man. I have so many questions. I hope people don't mind me asking a lot of them.
Yeah, let's do it.
As an athlete, right? So I understand like the study of film, right? Like from a physical standpoint, whether it's in, pregame or review, or even as a bodybuilder, powerlifter, like, I've become a master in biomechanics and exercise execution. A lot of that has been due to studying film, applying the exercises, watching myself, feedback, working with others, and then going out and apply those things. So I understand a little bit about the concept. I know the work that you're going to do is a whole lot differently. I guess maybe the first question I have in and around this is like, can you share what like cues, like what physical movements you're putting people through?
Yeah. So one of the most basic ones is handshaking. And people are like, wait a minute, you charge how much money to have somebody do what? Shaking hands. And so our hands, you want to start thinking of your body symbolically. So this work is non-rational. It is symbolic. And what that means is that it's not about saying, all right, well, your nose is pointed 14 degrees this way. Your hand is at a 12-degree angle. And so that means you're passive aggressive. That's not what we're doing. What we are doing is going more into a feeling place, into the symbolic realm, the subconscious realm, the dream realm, the place of myth. stories, right? The hero's journey. All of these archetypical ways of being get expressed through the body. So, for example, I said the handshaking. All right, so imagine I shook my hands like this. So what you're going to see here is one way of shaking hands. Now, what if I did it like this? Well, this is a very different way. Now, somebody who shakes their hands like this, for example, versus somebody who shakes their hands like this, has a different way of moving through the world, right? So this, you could imagine, is very stifled. Things have to be, it's very constrained. It's very small. It's very specific. It's very focused. Whereas this, right, you can see that the left and the right sides are more in unison, right? So these dynamics are in unison. The left brain, the right brain, the masculine, feminine, the yin and yang. It's bigger. Now, if someone moves their hands like this, well, you just added a whole new extra dimension of range. So there's an unlimited amount of variations in the way somebody can move their hands. Now, our hands are how we actualize ourselves in the world. If you think symbolically, right, I have to reach out and grab this. I can't just think, magically lift this cup up and take a drink. I have to have the thought and then use my body to do it. So the body is the place where our psychology, our internal space manifests physically. And so our hands are where we manipulate things. Our hands are where we actualize what we want to do in the world. Now imagine your feet, your legs. What might those be related to? If you think symbolically, what would the feet represent?
Uh, Symbolically, I mean, movement, I would think the first thing.
Yeah, right. So your feet and legs move you through the world, through your life. Your hands don't. Your hands manipulate things and actualize. Your feet move you. And so what you start to see is that, as you've seen in fitness, different parts of the body have different imbalances. Some are shut down, some have small range. Well, what I've discovered and have learned is that it's not just a physical thing, is that if you have these chronic limitations in your body, it oftentimes comes from a chronic thought pattern, a chronic way of being, a cultural way of being. I saw somebody once who came from a very traditional Chinese background, and she was she was older, and the way she walked was like this, right? Really, really tiny steps. Like she took 10 steps to walk as, let's say, an average person would. Well, come to find out, in her lineage, they bound feet. They didn't bind her feet, but through her female lineage, their feet were bound. And so that walking pattern was passed down to her. And she took it on as a baby, as a child, had no idea. That's just how mommy and auntie and granny did it. And so that's what she took on. So doing this work, what happened is we helped her penetrate that cultural myth, right? That cultural familial way of walking through life. And she started walking like, let's say, an average person. Well, that translates then into her business, into her personal life. So these symbolic things in the body don't just stay in the body. They translate to results in life. The person who moves through life like this is probably going to show up smaller in their life than somebody who lets themselves have a range like this. Versus someone's doing this all the time. That person is forcing, right? That person's aggressing through the world. Versus somebody who's maybe more peaceful, or someone maybe like this, right? Who's very passive. Like this, their hands are dead, right? You feel this. The hands are dead. If I wanted to lift this up, I couldn't. This is dead. And so this is somebody oftentimes who can't actualize themselves in the world. This is somebody who tries to do stuff in life, and yet nothing ends up being created from all of their efforts. So this is a little bit of how this works.
Yeah, man, that walking example, dude, hit me for a couple different reasons. I'll share a few, not a few stories here, but I can remember honestly, Andrew, it's probably around the age of 10, 11. Like I was aware of how my dad walked. My dad was very duck footish, like very wide. There wasn't a lot of like bounce like in his feet. And I was developing that as a kid. And something about it knew like that's not an optimal way to walk. That's actually going to impact my ability to do sport, to become athletic. So from a child's like brain, like I started being intentional about how I was walking. Now, my brother, on the other hand, who's 4 years younger than me, never was aware of these things. Now he's a 35-year-old man that literally walks complete, like almost more duck foot than my dad. So I get that a lot. And I had a cousin as well whose dad was pigeon toed, always on his calves, had incredible, always on his toes, had incredible calves. All three of his children developed walking patterns like on their toes, pigeon toed, grew up to have amazing calves. I mean, I've worked with specialists over the last couple of years, literally even rewriting my walking pattern because I was beginning to develop some ankle issues around the mobility side of things, and it all came down to how I was placing my feet, how I was using the ground. So like that walking thing really resonated with me. But I would also think that some of how we move is going to be based upon just our overall persona. Maybe not a persona, but just like some people are going to be a little bit more aggressive. Like they're going to lean more towards, more dominating kind of personality. So that's going to carry over into more dominating movements. Would that be the case? I mean, you're not really looking to land person into a specific formula. Is it assessing and then seeing where limitations and where things are kind of bound up? Is that kind of what your eye is looking for? Because there can't be a perfect way that everybody's going to move exactly the same way, right?
Right. So this is an excellent question, and this is what I discovered is that it's both objective and subjective. And so what I mean by this is there is, let's say, an objective beauty, right? There's certain harmonies between colors. There's certain harmonies between notes. There's certain symmetry in the face. There's certain ratios, mathematical ratios that we find more appeasing and attractive. And, right, everyone finds something a little more attractive or beautiful or not attractive or not to the others, right? So you could have 100 beautiful women that are beautiful by, let's say, a mathematical or societal standards, but every guy is going to have a different pick, a variation, or women with men, whatever it is. So that's a very superficial way to look at it. In what we're doing here, superficial not in bad, but just as basic way to see it. So what I'm doing is I'm holding both an objective and a subjective understanding of how certain things work. So what I'm looking for are a few criteria. Is this accurate? So what I mean by this is one of the other approaches that I do is archetypical. So I'll say, for example, ask somebody to do making money, or I'll say, show me approaching a woman, whatever it is. And they will, in their body, express that through their body. You can imagine maybe like charades. It's not a game. You're not acting for comedy or dramatizing. You're finding what that image of, let's say, approaching a woman is in your mind, and then translating it through movement in your body. While I'm watching that, what I'm looking for is this accurate? So if I said, all right, show me approaching a woman, and somebody, showed me this, like they're drinking a beer or a coffee or something, and they're just looking around. If you think that is approaching a woman, you're in trouble because it's not. That's drinking something. Or for, let's say, making money. Say, show me making money, and somebody does this, right? They're just drinking. That is drinking. That is not making money. So one thing I look for, is it accurate? Is the thing that you're expressing in your body the thing? Because there is an objective thing. Driving a car is different than painting a wall, which is different than eating, which is different than sleeping. Those are specific things. The definition of things are very important. We see what happens in worlds, in societies, when the definition of things gets distorted and messed up. Bad things happen. So the definition of things are really important. And so what I help people do and what I'm looking for is, are the somatic definitions? Is the internal definition of these concepts matched up with how that person's actually going to go and do it in their life? So that's one thing. But there's also, so think about it. There's probably 10,000 plus different ways of making money, but they're all probably going to make money. There's, let's say, 50 different ways or more, maybe hundreds, to approach a woman, to talk to a woman that all work. Well, now that there's probably 10,000 ways of approaching a woman that doesn't work, that is never going to turn into talking to a woman or making money. Unless you're a professional alcoholic, drinking isn't going to make you money. So there's an objective reality to things. And so when clients come in and those are off, so this is just the first thing I look at. There's a few other criteria, but this is the first thing. It's one of the most important. If someone comes in and I say, all right, show me making money or show me, talking to a woman, and they just stand there and do nothing, I know for certain that they are struggling with that in their life. If I say, show me making money, and you just stand there and you don't do anything, chances are you're not making 6, 7, 8, 9 figures. If you're making 5 figures, if you're making any figures. If I say, show me approaching a woman, talking to a woman, and you just stand there and you're like this and you're not doing anything, chances are you're not able to do that efficiently in your life. And so these ways of expressing ourselves in our body and internally have a direct correlation between what we actually do in our life. So that's the objective. And then the subjective in that is just, well, what is you? What is really you? And there's, you've probably seen pickup artists and stuff online. There's like 50 different kinds. They're all teaching their stuff and they're all working for them, but not for everybody. So there's a subjective element, but we don't even go there until we get the objective accuracy right.
Yeah, I think everybody listening has to have seen. They know that this is true, right? That our body, the way that we move, the way that other people move, is sending off signals. Whether it's we're consciously aware of these things or we're picking these things up innately and kind of in our unconscious, right? There's been certain people, when you're in a room, this individual walks in the room without saying a word, you're instantly drawn to their energy. There's something about the way that they move, the way that they kind of facilitate through others, the way they interact without even hearing what they're saying. You can see it in their movement. And we've probably felt it in our own life as well. We walk in with somewhere, maybe we're having an amazing day. We closed a big deal. Like we're just riding on a high. We walk in, they're like, Frank, there's something different about your energy here today. So I guess this comes to like the question around how does the work get to, because we're going to move differently based upon our internal state, I would assume. How we feel mentally, emotionally, and spiritually is going to dictate some of how we move. I mean, you mentioned Tony Robbins at the beginning. Tony Robbins talks about, like you're feeling down, just kind of like lift your chest up. Like instantly you're going to feel more confident just by raising your chest up. Or, motion creates emotion. So if you're feeling down, like go out for a run, you're instantly going to feel better. So we can lean into movement to change our state. But how are you assessing it? And like, it's not just a moment. This is actually rooted in more of a trauma deeper in the body. You understand the question that I'm asking here?
Yep, exactly. The big difference is that this is not state-based. So Tony Robbins is great. Just use him for example, because public figure.
Yeah, I just did.
Yeah. So he's great, but he's at a very high level and he has to help millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people at a time. He can't go deep with each and every single one of them. So he works a lot in these huge events with more entry-level work. And getting people out of depression, getting them motivated, changing their states, really important, really amazing work. It's just the beginning though. It's state-based. So what I'm doing is on the opposite end of the spectrum. So it's not beginner work, it's advanced work. It's not working with 1 million people at once, it's working with 1 to 20 people at a time. And because of that, we go deep into those actual traumas, into those things. And so the other important distinction is that it is not state-based, right? Because your state is going to change all the time. But healing from a trauma, shifting your mindset, penetrating a lifelong story, you do that once, it's done, right? When you finally let go of a victim story, when you finally penetrate the resentment you have against your father, when you finally face those things, it permanently shifts you. You don't have to say affirmations in the mirror every day. You don't have to get on a trampoline and jump up every day to feel happy. You're going to make your way towards peace and joy because you're stopping, you're subtracting. And this is, again, one of the fundamental differences of this work, is that we're not adding on more strategies to be happy, be joyful, add more joy. We're subtracting suffering. Frank, every child is born. They don't have to be taught how to smile and laugh. They don't have to be taught to be lovable. They don't have to be taught how to be worthy. They don't have to be taught how to laugh and have joy. These are innate. We learn how to suppress. We learn how to censor. We learn how to abandon ourselves, to betray ourselves for attention, love, approval, money. And so what we're doing in this work is we're actually facing all of these things. We're facing, how have we betrayed ourselves, abandoned ourselves? How have we hold on to this resentment in order to not take responsibility and make a new choice? How have we done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And as we penetrate each and every one of those, guess what happens? Those disappear, those dissolve. We integrate them. We stop the suffering, we stop the betrayal, and what's left is our peace, is our joy. And that is lasting. So people come to this work when they've tried everything else, it doesn't last, they've gotten a lot of results, but they still haven't made it. They're still not there. Or they got there in one area, but it hasn't transferred to the others, right? We're CEOs making millions of dollars, but the relationships, they have no intimacy. There's no connection there. And so when we get all of that working, it's permanent. It's not like you never have a bad day or anything like this, but you don't have to change your state to change how you see yourself. You change how you see yourself and your chronic state changes.
So let's walk through, a scenario example if we can here, right? I guess, so you're working with an individual, boom, cynosomatic, you see something, boom, okay, childhood trauma right there. Your dad was probably overbearing, maybe, always was telling you're never going to be enough. You recognize that in the movement. Walk us through like the next series of steps to like, are you using movement to rewrite that? I wouldn't assume that it's going to be based around the movement because you're saying it's not state-based. So once we identify what the holdup is that's manifesting in our movement, what's our process now of rewriting those patterns, rewriting those narratives using what we kind of opened up with the stories at the beginning?
Two ways really in how it works. One, oftentimes just that awareness, just the feedback itself from seeing yourself on video. Let's say do a movement that's very oppressive and overbearing. Let's say that client is the first time somebody's pointed that out to them. Oftentimes, I have clients and like, nobody's ever told me this before. Like I had a client who came in like breathing through his mouth, and he's in his 30s. And I said, well, just practice closing your mouth and breathing through your nose. He starts crying. I'm like, what? Nobody's ever showed me how to breathe through my nose. Nobody's actually taken it. I'm like, oh my God. He was an immigrant and, he was beat up and it had a lot of problems. But people just don't hear these things. People don't see these things, whether people around them are just trying to be kind, they're trying to be nice. Well, the problem is if you're not giving people feedback and telling people that you love the truth, you're holding them back. And so a lot of people come to me that are working at very high levels that are around, let's say, yes men or things like this, that aren't being told the truth. They're not being shown the feedback. So oftentimes just seeing it in our own bodies, just seeing ourselves, just hearing it is the beginning of the end of some of these stories. If you ever knew these were happening and someone shows you, they don't just tell you, right? People don't come in blindly believe Andrew because he's, a magical guru. No. Yes, I'm good at what I do. And yes, what I'm saying is true and real in the feedback, but you don't have to just believe me. You can see it for yourself in video. And so this is a fundamental breakthrough because there's this feedback loop, right? There's this non-biased, objective video, and that feedback loop seeing yourself in your body is oftentimes is enough to create the change. I'm sure you've done this in sports. You looked at the footage, you say, oh yeah, my foot's like this, or I threw it like that. Oh, my shoulder's down. You don't need to spend 10 minutes learning some new shoulder thing. You just say, all right, I'm throwing it. Right. Maybe put my shoulder up, right? Whatever it is. So oftentimes that feedback loop is enough. Sometimes there's discussion as well. Sometimes, all right, there's a big trauma. And so we go into, all right, so, well, when you feel this, what are you feeling? So everything is about feeling. What is the feeling underneath this? And again, when I say feeling, I don't mean, oh, our feelings are emotional reactivities being dramatic. No, I mean the real emotion, that real feeling that we've suppressed for 40 years, for 20 years of our life, that abandonment, that feeling of, let's say, being abandoned by our mother, that if we felt that, we'd get beat up for because we were going to cry around our friends, all of this stuff. We get told to suppress and hide these things. There is real emotion under there that is valid, that doesn't make us weak or anything like this. It's important. And so we help people start to feel those things that they haven't felt in decades. And that creates the healing. And the third thing is actually what you said probably wouldn't work is the movement. So as above, so below, but also as below, so above. And so we can actually use different movement to rewire that person's neural pathways. So if they're doing this, well, I say, all right, what would happen if you, we don't just say do the right movement, right? There is no perfect right movement. And I don't want to project my ideals onto somebody else. Oftentimes I work with people that are making 10, 100 times more money than me. So I'm not going to project my limitations potentially onto them. So I find ways to help them discover for themselves what that next level may be. So if someone's doing this, I say, all right, we've talked about it a little bit, and I got a hunch that maybe they're doing this because they're staying small, right? They're afraid of being seen and taken out or beat up or whatever. So I say, all right, now shake your hands, but do it in a way that feels exposed, right? Do it in a way where you feel exposed, like 100 people will see you. And then maybe they do this, and then they do this, and it's just like, right? There's a whole emotional, physiological reaction that occurs when they penetrate. Here's the thing, Frank. They penetrate that story we talked about in the very beginning. They penetrate it not by a decade of talking about it in a therapist's chair, but in seconds of moving bigger than they've ever moved before. And then that physical movement penetrates that emotional psychological block through the body. So it's extremely accelerated, but because it's extremely accelerated, it's also very confronting. That's why it's more advanced work, because in a minute, in a second, you can be face to face with, let's say, trauma that you've been avoiding for 40 years. So it really takes a sincere desire, but in a moment, you can let that go. In a moment, you can penetrate it. So those are kind of the three different ways that we actually do something with it. We actually have healing and change.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's so consistent with transformation really in any realm, right? It's awareness first, awareness of what the thing is, what it is we need to change, the intentionality now about having some change in there, and then tying in some real mechanisms, right? This one being movement. If I'm trying to change in an area of fitness, aware that, hey, I'm a little bit overweight, I'm aware, hey, I'm probably eating more calories than I should. Be intentional now about understanding the meal plan, understanding the amount of calories I need to be in, and then apply the principles of it, of meal prep, restricting of calories, and then a proper exercise routine. So once again, it's always universal, these success principles. Most of the people you work with, are they business people? Are they executives, entrepreneurs? You keep kind of referring to these higher level people. Is that where you kind of see your work really sliding in, is working with people that are here and they're trying to get to like that next tier, that next level?
Generally, as I said, the work is fairly advanced, and I'm very blessed to have a full practice and a lot of people wanting to do it. So that tends to be the people that, let's say, can access the work at that level. And it's not just that. I have my assessments that I keep very, very approachable, and I work with everyone from stay-at-home moms to entrepreneurs to artists, musicians, people in Hollywood. Um, I tend to attract people like myself, which are entrepreneurial. They are interested in health and healing. They are creative, artistic, um, musicians. So these generally anybody who I refer to it entrepreneurial and creative. To me, it's the same thing. Anyone who has something inside of themselves that they want to actualize, that they want to fully express and actualize themselves in the world, and tend to make a living from that. Because um, that journey is going to require development. That journey is going to require healing. It's not the only person, but it tends to be who I attract.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to one degree that's every human being, right? Has that inside. Some of them have suppressed it, do whatever due to whatever limitations have been pressed upon them, and they've gone more the traditional, probably what I would call slave route. But I think that sits on every side of it. The reason why I asked that question is I have a dear friend, Annie. We've had her on the show a couple times. Her work is centered around working with business owners, CEOs, overcoming their trauma because her belief system. So she's partnered with a former Navy SEAL, great friend of mine as well. We've done a couple shows with Larry as well. Actually, I run a coaching program with Larry. But Annie and Larry, after Larry's kind of deployment, all the issues that he had to overcome, they started getting into business and they realized like their businesses were being capped due to Larry's traumas. Like Larry's issues in his life was actually the cap of why the business wouldn't break through. So her work now is taking successful business owners, multi six, seven, seven figure guys and getting them to multi seven, maybe eight. Oftentimes it's through healing of the trauma because that trauma is going to begin to manifest in managerial styles and how you hire people and who you recruit into your team. So that's why I was kind of asking that question. It's like, because I've seen a lot of this work and I understand how it is so transformative and can actually lead to breakthrough. Because I have friends that have gone through work with Annie and it's like within 6 months, it's like their business is just at a completely different level. But I would also, in Annie, and this is things that we've talked about as well, is sometimes it's that trauma that actually creates the entrepreneurial spirit inside. So how do you kind of wrestle with that balance, right? If we're going to go chase something, sometimes that's going to be rooted in what happened to us in the past, but then we got to get to the point. So yeah, I'm not asking a specific question, just curious your kind of thoughts around what I kind of just threw at you here.
Yeah, well, I learned this a while ago, even before I got into this work. And that's what got you here isn't going to get you there. And that is absolutely the truth in this cynosomatic work, because what got you here served. It got you here, right? When someone shows up in front of me, bless their life, right? Bless those things that got them here. But where they're at usually has suffering, usually has limitations, plateaus, blocks, pain. And the things that they have been doing that got them the success isn't necessarily going to be the same way that they're going to break through those things, or else they would have already done it. And so I'll give you an example. I had a client years ago. They were a viral sensation online, millions of followers, and I try to keep it anonymized as I can. Their content was based on the suffering they had in their relationships, right? So they created art around their pain and their angst around the opposite sex.
Yeah, what we touched on earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what got them the millions of followers. And so we were doing the work, and it became very clear to me that they could either be happy and let go of all of that pain and suffering and finally have an amazing relationship with a new person and let all that stuff go and lose their business, their fame, their fortune, all that stuff, or not. Or they could keep what they had, keep doing it the same way, and still be stuck. Unfortunately, that person chose, not unfortunately, it's their choice, but they stopped working with me and kept doing what they were doing. And they continue to have the same struggles that they had 8 years ago. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that what we are afraid of giving up isn't always real. And so what I mean by that is we have to be willing to give up that success, that fame and fortune, in order to have peace. If that thing came through a path of suffering. Now, what usually happens is if you're willing to face that, if you're willing to have an ego death, right? This is a non-spiritual ego death. This is just like a career ego death. If you're willing to die and to lose all of that in order to finally have love and peace, what happens is oftentimes you don't lose that. It transmutes a portion of those people that were miserable and in that same victim story, that same suffering story, will not like you anymore. They will disappear, and you'll attract, chances are, an extremely larger group of people that are inspired by that new place you're in. But it requires that surrender. It requires you to go into that fire first, because that willingness is that transmutation flame that takes you to that next level. And so that's kind of the irony, because I see this, I saw the person and I see them and I'm like, if they were just willing to do that, they could have love and the success. It would just look different. But when the ego and fear is running you, it doesn't show you that option.
Andrew, we've linked it all the way back to where we opened up at the beginning, right? It's the stories, it's the narratives that we tell ourselves. So it's not that we have to give up on success. We have to redefine what success means to us and recreate that story of how we're going to get there. Recreate that narrative of what it means to us. I mean,
I'm gonna interrupt you here. We're actually not recreating the story. This is one of the things that is different. This is in a lot of positive psychology, right? They say spin the story, make it a better story. What my approach is to stop the stories altogether, right? So we don't make a new story. We're not telling a new tale, because guess what's going to happen? In 5 years, we're going to have to stop that story. We want to let go of the story. Rather than creating a new narrative, we want to get closer to, in my book, right, your true self. We want to get closer to the true self. We want who you really are to guide you to your success, to be the thing. You don't have to keep redefining who you really are, your true self, as you grow. Because it doesn't. It's impossible. It's beyond us. But what we're doing is subtracting. We're subtracting the stories. We're subtracting more and more and more narratives that on the surface make it look like we're growing and getting bigger and being more than we ever were. And we are more than we ever were. But the reality, the spiritual reality is we're less of the suppression. We're less of the drama. We're less of all that stuff, which allows our innate light to shine brighter. So I didn't want to correct you, but I kind of, because it's a fundamental difference.
Yeah, I want to follow up here though as well, because I believe that we live in a story, and I don't think that we can actually live in the world without living through a story. So I'm curious, like if we're eliminating the story, how are we then even able to exist in reality without there being some narrative tied to who we are, how we're placed in the world? Like there's got to be a story to our existence, right?
Yes. So that's a great question. So this is really, 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 really great question.
Because you talk spirituality, you talk myth story, you talk religion, all of these are stories that guide us through the world, whether we want to believe that they fundamentally happened or they're just the narratives of thousands, if not millions of years of human existence. They're the stories that tie us to our humanity. And then it's us living through those. Often, and that's, you talk about society, right? We've stripped out from underneath the fundamental story of our society. And that's why we have chaos in the world right now. So I believe that we actually have to live in some type of story.
Yeah. So I think you're really going to like this, because this is we're on the same page, but I'm inverted. So how I define stories, again, the definitions are important. I think we're on the same page. It's just the definitions. So the stories and what I talk about are these personal narratives we tell around the truth. What you're talking about are the archetypical stories of humanity. Those are two different things, right? Our personal narrative, our personal stories that we create through our distortions, filters, traumas, dramas, all of this stuff, versus the archetypical story that maps human consciousness throughout time, that whatever culture you're in, these archetypes play through. Now, that's that distinction, which I think puts us onto the same page, just different definitions. the inversion is that we're not playing we're not playing our life through these archetypical stories. These archetypical stories are playing through us. And so it's a fundamentally different way. It sounds like semantics, but I want you to just feel the difference. Imagine the hero's journey is this archetypical force of human consciousness. And we as humans are born, we come out of the earth, we come into existence. That energy, that story lives through us. It is existing through our actions as humanity. And so when we look at it that way, it's more of us being a vessel, a vehicle, a conduit for these divine or human, natural, archetypical ways of being through life that play through us. And so, yeah, that's how I see it, at least.
In order for us to even have this conversation, in order for us to even communicate with others, there's got to be a story. I'm going to meet up with some friends here later tonight. Frank, what'd you do today? Woke up, went through my routine, walked the dog, hit the sauna, cold plunge, went to the gym, got work done, interviewed Andrew, had a very compelling conversation, one that I didn't think it was going to go anywhere near this. Wrapped up, had a couple client coaching calls, went for a walk, drove the softball. Like, there's a story to how we even then narrate.
Yeah. Okay. So this is it's just a definition thing. We're just missing definitions of the word, because I would not call that a story. I would call that just reporting the details of what you did. So,
but that story could be differently, because I could be, I was driving to the gym and God, I got stuck in traffic and it was the worst time. And I was 5 minutes late.
That's a story.
That's a story. That's a different narrative of the story that I live today, though. Like, I lived a story. I just chose to share a very empowering one versus the one where I was late to the gym because I got stuck in traffic. I didn't really have a good workout because a person was on the gym. Person was using the machine I really wanted to use.
Yeah. So one of the difference is, again, it's just my definition of story. For you, your story is just the encapsulation of a series of events, which is, I guess, in one definition, a story. But for me, in the healing work, I wouldn't. I would just say you're just reporting the details of what happened. You're giving an account of what happened. And so when you're just reporting the details, there is no making it positive. There is no making it negative. And so these are the things with a story, is that we are moving beyond this dualistic or reframing approach, right? Because you could say, Sally died. You're just reporting the details. That's not a story. But if you say, Sally was an amazing person and she accomplished all this stuff and her time was too short and there's blah, 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 and I think she's amazing, but these people, she got poisoned, blah, blah, blah. That's a story. You're creating this whole thing versus just reporting the details is Sally died. Now, it's a definition thing, but the reason, this is just how I learned to call it this stuff, just in this way, because when we're doing the therapy, when we're doing the healing work, is that we help people let go of all of that narrative around the events in their life and say, what happened? This happened. That's it. If you can get to that place, what happens? Well, it forces you to go against maybe some of those uncomfortable feelings. Well, if I don't spin it positive, well, what's going to happen? Well, then all these other things want to come in. If I spin it negative, it reinforces all of this stuff. So we're kind of stripping away the drama, all of the story around it, and just getting to the details. I don't think that's in conflict with what you're saying. I think I'm just defining it differently.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is as well. I mean, and how you're describing it is, very isolated in that sense. And we're trying to overcome this one thing right now to then empower us to then go out there and really live in the world. So yeah, I think we're probably in congruence with a lot of these things here. Like you said, it's semantics and language, kind of maybe a little bit different in how we're describing things. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that to take up as much as it did, but that was really engaging, man. I really enjoyed that. Andrew, man, tell us or tell the guys where they can find you. Obviously, I want to point them to a lot of the work that you're doing. We unpacked a little bit of it, but I know there's so many layers to this. So if somebody's interested in learning more, reading about this, where can they find you? Where can they find the work? And then obviously let us know about the book there as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the book is Awaken to Your True Self, Why You're Still Stuck and How to Break Through. And everything that we talked about is literally in chapter 1 of 18. So everything we talked about is in chapter 1 of 18.
We were
And
real
so-
deep today.
Yeah. So there's a lot of other topics. I go into narcissism, victim mentality. Well, we talked about some of the embodiment stuff. There's a lot of stuff in it. So this is a book for someone who has already done a lot of work. Whatever industry, whatever is going on for you, this will apply. If you have already done spiritual, personal development, self-help kind of work, and you're still not there, this is going to be the book for you. It's dense, it's big, and it has everything you need in it. This is not a marketing book. This is not a fluff book. There's things in here that you will not find anywhere else. I promise you, I guarantee it, because I discovered them myself and nobody else has known about them. So there's real new stuff in here. So you can check that out. Amazon, all formats, audiobook, whatever. And everything else is at andrewdaniel.org. You can learn about my other work there, Cinesomatics. There's also another website for that, cinesomatics.org. You can find that on my homepage as well. But yeah, so the book and my private practice is pretty full, but if you can find some openings for an assessment, that's where we'll do the handshaking thing and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, if not, on my website, I got a free life map. We didn't really talk about that, but there's some free stuff there, and get my book.
Yeah, awesome. And guys, we'll have all that information plugged down in the show notes. We'll have a link to the book. We'll have a link to all of Andrew's websites and socials there as well. And obviously, we point you guys to the Cinesomatics here. Andrew, would like to end every single episode with the same question. Before we get there, though, guys, if you got value out of this conversation, make sure to subscribe, make sure to rate this. And more importantly, if somebody's struggling with something in their life and they need today's conversation, make sure to do us a favor, and then they'll bless them by sharing this. But Andrew, last question here. The title of the show is called The Superhuman Life. For me, when I talk about living a superhuman life, it's a belief system, or it's a way that I try to show up in the world every single day. And it's coming from the place first that I do believe we're here for a purpose. None of this is by accident. We're not having this conversation today, just by chance. It's supposed to happen. But knowing that is not enough. We must be very intentional about our growth, our development, how we then bring that purpose into the world in service of others. So that's my kind of, I guess, ideology. I don't want to say ideology, but that's how I kind of explain what it means to live a superhuman life to me. But I love to get the guest take. So Andrew Daniels, within today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Oh gosh, embodying the truth, right? So in my book, I say make the truth the most important thing. Align yourself to the truth. Stand for the truth in yourself and the world, and embody it. Don't just think about it. Don't just find that an ideal. Actually live it. Find the truth in your body. Be in your body, and from this embodied place of standing from the truth, you will discover worlds unknown to you before.
Amen. No, 100%, guys. Get it embodied. Check out Andrew, the book. Like he said, thick, condensed, but so much you're going to get out of it, guys. Andrew, I really enjoyed today's conversation. Guys, we love you, and we'll see you next week.